Asterisk. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she folded the last of the laundry, placing her husband's shirts carefully into the drawer. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mark had been working late again, and she'd grown used to the silence, the empty dinners, the cold side of the bed. She told herself it was normal that all marriages went through phases like this. But deep down, something felt different. Something felt wrong. She walked down the hallway of their suburban home, her bare feet padding softly against the hardwood floor. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows that made the familiar space feel somehow foreign. Sarah paused at the bedroom door, her hand resting on the frame. She didn't know why, but her chest felt tight, her breathing shallow. It was just another evening, just another night alone. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room smelled faintly of Mark's cologne, a scent that used to comfort her but now only reminded her of his absence. She moved to the closet, pulling out comfortable clothes for the night. Her mind wandered as she changed, thinking about the weekend ahead. Mark's brother, Ethan, was visiting. He'd be staying with them for a few days while he sorted out some work issues in the city. Ethan. The thought of him made her pause. She hadn't seen him in months, maybe close to a year. He was different from Mark, quieter, more thoughtful. Where Mark was all business and efficiency, Ethan had this way of really listening, of seeing people. Sarah shook her head, pushing the thought away. It didn't matter. He was family, nothing more. She pulled her shirt over her head, standing in just her bra and jeans when she heard it, the soft click of the bedroom door opening. Her heart stopped. She froze, her arms instinctively crossing over her chest as she spun around. Ethan stood in the doorway, his hand still on the handle, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. The air between them grew thick, heavy with something Sarah couldn't name. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Ethan stammered, his face flushing red as he quickly turned away. "I didn't know you were in here. Mark said I could use the guest room, but I thought this was it. I'm sorry, Sarah, I'll just go." His words trailed off, but he didn't leave immediately. He stood there, his back to her, his shoulders tense, his breathing audible in the silent room. Sarah's mind raced. She should say something, tell him it was okay, laugh it off, but her voice wouldn't come. Her body felt paralyzed, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She grabbed her shirt, pulling it on quickly, her hands shaking. "It's okay," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was an accident." Ethan turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was something in his gaze, something that made her chest tighten even more. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was recognition, awareness, something dangerous and unspoken. "I really am sorry," he said again, his voice softer now, almost tender. "I should have knocked." Sarah nodded, unable to look away. She wanted to tell him to leave, to forget this ever happened. But instead, she stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the weight of his presence in a way she hadn't expected. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Finally, Ethan stepped back, his hand reaching for the door. "I'll see you downstairs," he said quietly, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and Sarah collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face. Her whole body trembled, her mind spinning. It was just an accident. Nothing had happened. But why did it feel like everything had changed? Why did her heart still race? Why could she still feel his eyes on her, even though he was gone? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was ridiculous. He was her husband's brother. This was nothing. But as she sat there in the quiet room, the shadows growing longer around her, Sarah knew the truth. Something had shifted. Something had started, and she didn't know if she could stop it. Asterisk, downstairs, Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, his hands gripping the edge as he tried to calm his racing thoughts. He hadn't meant to walk in, he hadn't meant to see her like that. But now the image was burned into his mind and he couldn't shake it. Sarah, his brother's wife. The woman he'd always admired from a distance, always kept at arm's length because she was off limits. But in that moment, in that doorway, something had broken inside him. Some wall he'd carefully built had crumbled. He ran a hand through his hair, cursing under his breath. This was wrong. This was dangerous, but he couldn't deny what he'd felt. The pull, the awareness, the way his heart had stopped when their eyes met. He'd seen it in her face too. The shock, yes, but also something else. Something that mirrored his own confusion, his own longing. Ethan heard footsteps on the stairs and straightened quickly, composing himself. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back now, her expression carefully neutral. "Hey," she said softly, not quite meeting his eyes. "I made some tea. Want some?" He nodded, watching as she moved around the kitchen with practiced ease. They didn't speak, but the silence wasn't comfortable. It was charged, heavy with everything unsaid. Every glance felt loaded, every accidental brush of hands as she passed him a cup sent sparks through his skin. "Mark's working late again?" Ethan asked, trying to fill the quiet with something, anything normal. Sarah nodded, wrapping her hands around her mug. "He always does these days. I think he's trying to make partner." There was something in her voice, a sadness that made Ethan's chest ache. "Are you okay?" he asked before he could stop himself. Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment he saw the truth. No, she was okay. She was lonely, hurting, lost in her own home. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice barely steady. But her eyes told a different story. Ethan wanted to reach out to comfort her, to tell her she deserved better. But he couldn't. He shouldn't. So instead, he just nodded and they stood there in the kitchen, two people caught in a moment they both knew was dangerous, both knew they should walk away from, but neither of them moved. The tea grew cold in their hands. Outside, the sun had set completely, leaving only the soft glow of the kitchen lights. Sarah finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry about earlier." That was awkward. Ethan shook his head quickly. "Don't apologize, it was my fault entirely. I should have been more careful." But even as he said it, he couldn't forget the moment, the vulnerability in her eyes, the way time had seemed to stop. Sarah set down her mug, her fingers tracing the rim nervously. "Mark didn't tell me you were coming until this morning. He's been so distracted lately." There it was again, that note of sadness, of loneliness that made Ethan's heart clench. "How long has it been like this?" he asked gently. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the directness of the question. She opened her mouth, then closed it, considering. Finally, she sighed. "Months, maybe longer, I don't even know anymore. We just exist in the same space. We don't really talk, we don't connect." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Ethan saw her blink rapidly, fighting back tears. Without thinking, he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. The contact was gentle, meant to comfort, but the moment his skin touched hers, electricity shot through them both. Sarah gasped softly, her eyes flying to his face. They stood frozen, inches apart, both feeling the dangerous pull between them. "Sarah," Ethan whispered, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't hide. She shook her head slowly, but she didn't step away. "This is wrong," she breathed, but her words lacked conviction. "I know," he agreed, but his hand remained on her arm, his thumb moving in small circles against her skin. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Every breath Sarah took seemed to pull her closer to him. Every beat of her heart reminded her that she was alive, that she felt something she hadn't felt in so long. Desire, connection, being seen. Asterisk, the sound of a car door slamming outside broke the spell. Sarah jumped back as if burned, her hand flying to her chest. "That's Mark," she gasped, her face flushing. Ethan stepped away quickly, putting distance between them, running a hand through his hair. His heart pounded, guilt washing over him in waves. What were they doing? What had they almost done? Mark's key turned in the lock, and Sarah busied herself at the sink, her hands shaking as she rinsed the mugs. Ethan moved to the opposite side of the kitchen, leaning against the counter, trying to appear casual, normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. Mark walked in, his tie loosened, his briefcase heavy in his hand. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "Hey," he said, barely glancing at Sarah before turning to his brother. "Ethan, you made it. Sorry I couldn't be here when you arrived. Work, been insane." He set down his briefcase and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Ethan watched as Mark didn't kiss Sarah, didn't ask about her day, didn't even really acknowledge her presence beyond that initial greeting. And he saw the way Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. "No problem," Ethan replied, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "Sarah, been a great host." Mark nodded absently, already scrolling through his phone. "Good, good. Listen, I've got some calls to make. Sarah, did you eat? There's probably leftovers or something." He didn't wait for an answer, already heading toward his home office. "I'll be working late, so don't wait up." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Sarah and Ethan alone again in the kitchen. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, weighted with everything they'd almost done, everything they'd almost said. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her jaw clenched. Ethan wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her she deserved so much more than this. But he couldn't. She was his brother's wife. This was his brother's home, so he stood there, helpless, watching as she quietly wiped her eyes and began pulling out ingredients for dinner. "You don't have to cook," Ethan said softly. "I can order something." Sarah shook her head. "It's fine, I need to keep busy." Her voice was tight, controlled, but Ethan heard the pain underneath. He moved closer, careful to maintain distance but needing to say something. "Sarah, you don't have to pretend with me, I can see you're hurting." She stopped cutting vegetables, her hands stilling on the counter. For a long moment she didn't move. Then her shoulders began to shake and quiet sobs escaped her. Ethan couldn't stand it anymore. He crossed the distance between them and gently turned her to face him. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried against his chest. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. But in that moment, all he could think about was comforting her, being there for her in a way his brother wasn't. Sarah's arms wrapped around him, her fingers clutching his shirt as years of loneliness poured out. Ethan held her tighter, his hands stroking her hair, his heart breaking for her. "You deserve better than this," he whispered into her hair. "You deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved." Sarah pulled back slightly, looking up at him through tear-stained eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, and in that single word was a question, a plea, a confession. He cupped her face gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. They stood like that, frozen in a moment that stretched between right and wrong, between loyalty and desire. Ethan's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to kiss her, to show her what she was missing, to give her the attention and affection she so desperately craved. But he couldn't. He was frozen between wanting her and knowing this would destroy everything. Sarah's breathing quickened, her eyes searching his face. She could feel the war inside him because the same battle raged in her. This was Mark's brother, her husband's family. But Mark had been absent for so long, had left her feeling invisible, unwanted. And here was Ethan, really seeing her, really caring. Asterisk. The moment broke when they heard Mark's office door open upstairs. Sarah and Ethan sprang apart, both breathing hard, both looking guilty. Sarah turned back to the counter quickly, her hands trembling as she resumed cutting vegetables. Ethan stepped back, putting the kitchen island between them, creating a barrier that felt necessary and painful at the same time. The evening passed in careful politeness. Sarah made dinner. The three of them sat at the table, Mark talking about work, barely noticing the tension between his wife and brother. Ethan watched Sarah throughout the meal, seeing the way she played with her food, barely eating. Seeing the way she smiled at Mark's stories, but the smile never reached her eyes. Seeing the way Mark didn't notice any of it. After dinner, Mark retreated to his office again. "Big presentation tomorrow," he explained, not apologizing, just stating fact. Sarah cleaned up and Ethan helped despite her protests. They moved around each other carefully, avoiding touch, avoiding eye contact, but the awareness between them was constant, electric. "I should go to bed," Sarah finally said, drying her hands. "The guest room is ready for you. Second door on the right, not the master bedroom," she added with a sad attempt at humor. Ethan managed a small smile. "I'll remember this time." Their eyes met, and the memory of earlier of him walking in on her, of the moment in the kitchen, hung between them like smoke. Sarah's breath caught. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it, shaking her head. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Sarah." He watched her walk away, every fiber of his being wanting to follow, to say the things he shouldn't say, to do the things he shouldn't do. Instead, he stayed in the kitchen, his hands gripping the counter, fighting with himself. Later that night, Ethan lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Down the hall, he could hear Mark's voice on a phone call, still working. And somewhere in that house, Sarah was alone in her bed, probably staring at the same ceiling, feeling the same confusion, the same dangerous pull. Ethan knew he should leave. He should pack his bags and go to a hotel, put distance between himself and this impossible situation. But he couldn't. Something kept him there, some need to be near her to protect her, even if the thing she needed protection from was himself. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. His door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, he saw Sarah pass by, heading downstairs. Without thinking, he got up, pulling on a shirt, and followed. He found her in the kitchen, standing by the window, looking out at the dark street. She didn't turn when he entered, but she spoke softly. I can't sleep anymore. Most nights I just come down here and wait for morning. Ethan moved closer, standing beside her. How long have you been this unhappy? Sarah was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I don't know when it started, it was so gradual. First he worked late one night, then two, then every night. We stopped talking about real things, stopped touching, stopped seeing each other. And I kept telling myself it would get better, that this was just a phase. But it's been 2 years, Ethan. 2 years of feeling invisible in my own home. A tear slid down her cheek. Sometimes I wonder if he'd even notice if I disappeared. Ethan's heart shattered. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. I notice you, Sarah, I see you, you're impossible not to see. She turned to face him, her eyes glistening with tears and something else. Something that terrified and thrilled him. That's what makes this so dangerous, she whispered. You make me feel alive again, you make me feel seen. And I know it's wrong, I know we can't. But God, Ethan, I'm so tired of feeling nothing. Asterisk, they stood in the dark kitchen, hands joined, both knowing they were at a precipice. One more step and everything would change. One more word and there would be no going back. Ethan's free hand came up slowly, cupping her face. Sarah, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. Tell me to leave. Tell me to go upstairs and forget this. Because if you don't, I don't know if I can stop myself from. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Sarah's eyes closed, tears streaming down her face. Every part of her screamed at her to step back, to remember her vows, to think of Mark. But Mark hadn't thought of her in years. Mark had already left their marriage emotionally. Mark wouldn't even notice. I can't, she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his. I can't tell you to leave. That was all Ethan needed. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away to stop this. But Sarah didn't move. Their lips met softly at first, tentative, testing. Then the kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into it. Sarah's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. Ethan's arms wrapped around her, holding her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was everything. For those moments, nothing else existed. Not Mark, not guilt, not consequences. Just the two of them, finally giving in to what had been building since the moment he'd walked into her room. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, reality came crashing back. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock at what they'd done. Oh God, she gasped. What have we done? Ethan's face was torn between desire and guilt. Sarah, no, she interrupted, stepping back. This can't happen, you're his brother, I'm his wife. This is, she couldn't finish, couldn't name what they'd just done. Ethan ran both hands through his hair, his own guilt and confusion warring with the feelings he couldn't deny. I know it's wrong. But Sarah, you felt it too. That wasn't nothing. It doesn't matter what I felt, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I made vows, your family, we can't do this. Tears streamed down her face. I need you to go, tomorrow. Please, Ethan, we can't be near each other. Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes tormented. Every part of him wanted to argue, to fight for her, to tell her she deserved happiness even if it meant breaking rules. But he saw the panic in her eyes, the guilt consuming her, and he knew he couldn't push. Okay, he said quietly. I'll leave tomorrow. But Sarah, this isn't over. You know it is. You can't spend the rest of your life being invisible, being alone. Watch me, she whispered, then turned and fled upstairs, leaving Ethan alone in the dark kitchen. He stood there for a long time, his fingers touching his lips where hers had been, knowing that one moment, one kiss had changed everything. Upstairs, Sarah crawled into her empty bed, Mark still in his office, oblivious. She buried her face in her pillow, muffling her sobs. She crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She felt things she couldn't unfeel. And the worst part was she didn't regret it. She regretted the circumstances, the betrayal, the impossibility, but she didn't regret finally feeling alive again. The next morning, Ethan packed his bags early. He left a note saying something had come up at work, that he needed to go. Mark barely looked up from his laptop when told. Sarah stayed in her room until she heard the front door close. When she finally came downstairs, he was gone. But on the kitchen counter, she found a note in his handwriting. You deserve to be seen, you deserve to be loved, don't settle for less. I'm sorry for everything, but I'm not sorry for making you feel alive, even for a moment. Ethan. Sarah clutched the note to her chest, tears falling, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The house felt emptier than ever. Mark came home late that night, as always. Where, Ethan? He asked absently. He had to leave. Work emergency, Sarah replied, her voice hollow. Oh, that's too bad. Well, I've got calls to make. And just like that, Mark disappeared into his office, never noticing his wife's red eyes, her trembling hands, her broken heart. Sarah stood in the kitchen where, just last night, she'd felt alive. Now she felt more alone than ever, because she'd tasted something real, something passionate, something that saw her. And now it was gone, leaving her in a marriage that was already over in everything but name. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she could stay in this hollow existence. But she knew one thing with certainty. He walked into her room unexpectedly and she'd frozen, but he'd also walked into her heart. And that, she realized, was the real story. Not the kiss, not the betrayal, but the awakening, the realization that she deserved more, that she was worth more. And that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't breaking the rules. It's realizing you've been breaking yourself to keep them.